Welcome into Brewers Daily, your home for fresh Brewers content every single day of the week. I'm your host, Dave Gasper. Lots to get to on the show today. The MLB offseason is heating up. A lot is going to be happening this week. A lot of transactions are going to be coming down the wire. A couple of big days this week coming up. On Friday, at the end of the week, is the tender deadline. So we're going to see tender, non-tender decisions. We're going to get into that later in the week as well. But coming up on Tuesday, tomorrow here, we have the deadline for players to accept or reject qualifying offers, of which the Brewers have already offered Brandon Woodruff. And we also have the deadline to set your 40-man roster for the Rule 5 draft, which means the Brewers are going to have to decide what prospects they want to protect prior to that draft. So we are going to get into that here on the show today. But first, what I want to get into here is some of the reports that we've seen over the weekend now that the GM meetings have concluded, what we've seen from the insiders putting things together. And something that stuck out to me, this wasn't necessarily a specific rumor to the Brewers, but it's a possibility that I think we need to consider here as Brewers go through the offseason, and that is the closer trade market and what the Brewers could do with Trevor Megill, who is fully healthy after having the elbow issue to end the regular season, but then coming back in the postseason. So this report on The Athletic that came out that in the catcher market, or not the catcher market, the closer market is incredibly active, and there are 11 teams at least that are active in the closer market. You got the Braves, the Orioles, the Cubs, the Twins, the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, the Giants, the Tigers, the Rangers, the Reds, the Yankees. All those teams are potentially looking for closers this offseason. And there's about four top free agents that could fit the bill for those teams: Edwin Diaz, Robert Suarez, Pete Fairbanks, and of course Devin Williams. But there's a lot more teams seeking closer help than there are closers available, which could make the trade market quite fruitful for the Brewers. The Brewers traded their closer Devin Williams last year. It got them a Rookie of the Year finalist at third base in Caleb Durbin. It also got them a starter in Nestor Cortez, who only made a couple starts, injuries, but then they end up flipping him at the trade deadline. But could the Brewers do it again? Is it a possibility that the Brewers could trade their closer once again after Trevor Megill had a fantastic season for the Milwaukee Brewers this year? And they also have another option there, Abner Uribe, who took over in the absence of Megill down the stretch and looks to be the closer in waiting here for the Brewers, and could easily take over that job, because the Brewers just always seem to have that next closer in line, no matter who it is. Whether it's Josh Hader, then to Devin Williams, then to Trevor Megill, there always just seems to be that next guy down the line to take over that closer's job that the Brewers have. And you got a great year out of Megill, potentially a career year. Is now the time to potentially sell high on Trevor Megill. I think that's something that the Brewers have to consider, especially with how active the trade market is and how active the market is for closers. Megill has 2 years of team control left. He's projected for a little over $4 million in arbitration this year, so he's still affordable for the Brewers. It's not quite like reaching Devin Williams level or Josh Hader level where they have to trade him early because they just don't want to pay that much money to a reliever. $4 million is still tolerable for a reliever for the Brewers, especially for someone as good as Megill. So I don't think it's as much of a certainty that Megill gets traded this offseason as it was that Devin Williams got traded. But I think it is a possibility that we need to consider, because there are going to be teams out there looking for it. Megill is now an established closer, and you could get something of pretty good value back for 2 years of control over someone like Trevor Megill. And that could perhaps get the Brewers what they need, rather than trading away a Freddie Peralta this offseason, because we've seen the rumors about that. But also Matt Arnold saying oh no, we're going to keep him. So if the Brewers do have to keep Freddie Peralta and they don't want to pay a whole bunch in free agency, how are they going to upgrade the roster? How are they going to make some changes? Maybe you trade Trevor Megill. Maybe that's the trade chip that the Brewers have to offer this offseason. The market seems to be there. I'm sure plenty of those teams, because again, at least 11 of them: Braves, Orioles, Cubs, Twins, Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Giants, Tigers, Rangers, Reds, Yankees, all in the market for a closer. Now, we could probably cross the Cubs off the list of trade partners there for Trevor Megill, but still, that is something to keep in mind as the offseason goes along, and something Matt Arnold's going to have to keep in mind and potentially make that kind of move. And those are the kind of moves that could help Matt Arnold win Executive of the Year once again, because we saw at MLB Awards last week, Matt Arnold takes home Executive of the Year in back-to-back years. He gets back-to-back titles. Pat Murphy gets back-to-back Manager of the Year titles. Just an incredible run, but a great year for Matt Arnold. I mean, with the trade of Devin Williams, with the trade for Quinn Priester, the trade for Andrew Vaughn, a lot of the moves that he made. I mean, to be able to turn that team, to be able to turn losing your starting shortstop, losing your all-star closer, and turning in a better year and getting a franchise record 97 wins out of that group. Just an incredible job by Matt Arnold, identifying the right guys, and he gave a fantastic speech at MLB Awards. Certainly well-deserved to win Executive of the Year once again for 2025. Now, Matt Arnold's going to have some other decisions to make here as the offseason is churning along. And as I mentioned, coming up on Tuesday here, coming up tomorrow, we have the deadline to add players to the to the 40-man roster to protect them from the Rule 5 draft. This is where you see the prospects get put on the 40-man, and you want to make sure you protect them, that no other team takes them. Now, last year, the Brewers opted not to protect Shane Smith on their 40-man roster when I thought, and I argued at the time, that they should have protected him. Instead, they didn't. The White Sox took Shane Smith, number 1 overall in the Rule 5 draft, and Shane Smith turned in a fantastic season for the White Sox, made it the whole year on their club, and he is officially sticking as a member of the White Sox organization. The Brewers had no room for him at the time, but as he got into April, I bet the Brewers were really regretting not having Shane Smith on their roster, not keeping him around. So, could the Brewers do something similar again this year? Could they leave off someone important? It's always possible. The Brewers have a lot of depth on their 40-man roster, but they're gonna have some decisions to make here as the deadline's coming up. Now, the Brewers' 40-man roster currently stands at 38, so that means they have room to add 2 prospects potentially, to this 40-man roster to protect them. Will they use both spots? Potentially. Potentially not. It's kind of a relatively weak class this year for Brewers prospects that need to be added to the 40-man roster because we're looking at the 2022 draft, the college players from there, and then the high school players from the 2021 draft who would be eligible this year. And it's a relatively weak crop of eligible players. The ones who were good players from those drafts have already kind of made it up to the 40-man roster. Jacob Misiorowski, chief among them. If Misiorowski didn't debut this year, this would be his year for him to be added to the 40-man roster. But he's already there, already made an all-star appearance, so he's already safe there. But the one name that sticks out to me that I think fans should look at, that he doesn't generate a ton of headlines. He's not someone who's had a ton of prospect hype, but he's someone that I'm looking at as a potential dark horse addition to the 40-man roster this year, is Brian Fitzpatrick. So Brian Fitzpatrick was a 10th round pick in the 2022 draft. He was out of Rutgers University. Big Ten, not really known as a powerhouse for baseball, but still Brian Fitzpatrick, 6'7", left-handed pitcher out of Rutgers. 25 years old, and he had a fantastic season this year, had a 3.59 ERA across AA and AAA, 38 games that he pitched in. He's a reliever, but he's a tall, left-handed reliever with some really good stuff, got some really great results this year in the upper levels of the minors. He's someone that absolutely could factor in as a bullpen piece this year, especially being that left-handed arm. He could factor in as a very important bullpen piece to kind of rotate throughout the season. So I think he's someone that the Brewers could and should protect when it comes to the 40-man roster, because relievers like that generally do tend to go in the Rule 5 draft. It's a lot easier for teams to try and keep those guys on the 40-man roster, to try and pick them, to find a spot for them on their 26-man roster. Because if you pick them in the Rule 5 draft, you got to keep them on the big league roster throughout the entire season. You cannot option them down throughout the year. So a reliever, especially a left-handed reliever, it is going to be incredibly easy for some other team, like the White Sox, for example, to pick and stash someone like Brian Fitzpatrick in their bullpen as a left-handed arm and keep him around. So if I'm the Brewers, Brian Fitzpatrick is a guy that I'm looking at to add to my 40-man roster. Again, not the greatest prospect type, hasn't really been a starter. He's been a reliever, but he's someone who absolutely, I think, can factor in to the Brewers' big league roster this next year. And if not the Brewers, he could factor into someone else's. So he's someone, if I'm Matt Arnold, I'm looking to add to that 40-man. And other than that, you could maybe make a case for Matthew Wood, the catcher out of Penn State, drafted that year in the 4th round. Wood, he played last year at high A and double A. Put up some pretty good numbers offensively across the board, but he's been kind of surpassed as a catching prospect in the organization by Marco Dingus, and the prospects star isn't really shining that brightly for Matthew Wood's future in the organization, so I'm not entirely sure that he'd be worth protecting. But at the same time, you look at the Brewers 40-man roster, they only have 2 catchers on there. You got William Contreras and you got Jefferson Caro, and that's it. Caro has no big league experience. Obviously, Matthew Wood doesn't either, so it's not like Wood's going to protect you much in that sense. But if you want another catcher on your 40-man roster, Matthew Wood would be the one to protect at this point. But I've got a feeling they might leave that spot vacant because it's also very difficult for another team to look at taking a catcher and just stashing him on their big league roster for the entire season after he only got about a half season at Double A. So I think the Brewers can take a bit more of a roll of the dice and let Matthew Wood be unprotected for the Rule 5 draft and just dare some other team to pick him up and take him. And other than that, I mean, that's really mainly it for the candidates to be selected to the 40-man roster, just because it's a relatively thin crop this year. The ones who would have been eligible this offseason have either already been brought up to the big league club, already been brought up to the 40-man roster, or they've just simply not been good enough that is simply not worth protecting them for. So, and that's where you kind of look at that 2022 draft that the Brewers had, and it did leave a little bit to be desired. Now, granted, you did have Jacob Misiorowski in there, okay? Great work. Fantastic job picking him, and he has been everything that the Brewers would hope for in that draft class. They saved up their money. He got the biggest bonus pool from them, or biggest signing bonus from them that year, even more than their first-round pick, Eric Brown Jr., who's also Rule 5 eligible this winter here, but Eric Brown Jr. has not been good enough to warrant protecting on the 40-man roster. I don't think the Brewers are looking at him that way. Brown has been a relative disappointment. He's been injured quite a bit, which doesn't help him. But he was thought to be someone who could rise pretty quickly throughout the system as a college shortstop from Coastal Carolina. And he hasn't panned out to this point. Robert Moore has already been traded, their competitive balance round pick that year. And then, I mean, just kind of looking at the rest of that draft early on there, you got Dylan O'Reilly, who's a high schooler, missed all this season due to injury, but a pretty decent prospect there. Matthew Wood, as discussed, kind of been disappointing as a 4th-round pick. Will Rudy missed all this year due to injury as a pitcher. Tyler Wasner has already been released. Ben Metzinger has already been released. You got Nate Peterson, who's also a potential candidate, but I don't think he's that close to making the big league roster. Tayden Hall has been really slow to get going as a 9th-round pick. And so, it hasn't been the greatest class. You haven't really seen a ton of results from that group quite yet. I mean, really only Misiorowski has made any sort of noise and developed it as a big-time prospect for the organization and been a big piece of this. Luke Adams in the 12th round is probably your next best pick here as a 12th round pick out of Hinsdale Central High School in Illinois. And Adams, I mean, he's kind of been a tough scout when it comes to prospect status. There's a lot of different opinions on him, just with his swing path and his passivity at the plate. You could say it's kind of a split camp in terms of his prospect profile, but he's been able to get some results. But again, he's still in Double-A, and because he was picked out of high school, he gets another year before he's Rule 5 eligible. So Adams wouldn't be Rule 5 eligible until next offseason. That's when the Brewers would face a decision on whether or not to keep him on the 40-man roster. But this year, it's a thin crop, and the Brewers don't have a ton of room to add to their 40-man. So it almost kind of works out that way, the way the Brewers have done it. So we will find out on Tuesday. We're going to find out tomorrow here what the Brewers end up actually doing with the Rule 5 protection. But those are really kind of the main candidates that I think we're looking at here for the Brewers. Brian Fitzpatrick to add, Matthew Wood as well. The Brewers already added Coleman Crow to the 40-man roster. He was another candidate that I thought, and he's already been brought on, so that decision's been made. But I'm really strongly looking at Brian Fitzpatrick as that 40-man roster addition. And even then, it's not even a slam dunk case, I don't think, for Fitzpatrick. But I feel pretty good that he would be the guy if the Brewers were to add him. And there is a very real chance that they add no one at the deadline here on Tuesday. But that's also going to be the day where we see what happens with Brandon Woodruff, if he decides to accept or reject that qualifying offer. We'll talk more about that coming up in future episodes here this week on Brewers Daily. So stay tuned for that, and you're not going to want to miss those episodes. So be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel here, Brewers Daily, and hit that notification button as well to get notified every single time new episode pops up here on Brewers Daily. They usually do around 10 a.m. Central Time here. So very excited for this week. We're going to see a lot of roster moves, a lot of new free agents come out there. We're going to see where teams stand on a lot of their prospects, and we're going to see what happens with all these qualifying offer decisions. So we're going to have all of it covered here on Brewers Daily. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at dgasper24. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time for another edition of Brewers Daily.